Yeah, so my name's Steve Bolsover. I serve with Cleveland Police. I was a temporary sergeant on a response unit there, and have recently been medically retired in February this year, 2025, as a result of some injuries I sustained whilst at work. So basically, for myself, I always wanted to join the police from being a young kid. A couple of my parents' friends, they would often pop round for coffee whilst on duty back in the 70s. And it was something that always intrigued me to, want to do. So as you know, you get older, you make many attempts to join the police, and eventually I was successful in 2000. Initially, I joined British Transport Police and then transferred to Cleveland, where I was posted initially in Hartlepool on response. Whilst on response, supervision there, quickly acknowledged that, my capabilities and experience and stuff like that, because I'd previously been a special for Cleveland, that I could quickly take up the role of acting and stuff like that. So whilst I was on response, I've always dipped in and out of being acting or being temporary and stuff like that. So initially, whilst I was at Hartlepool, I left Hartlepool to go to the tutor unit. So that was a dedicated unit based in Stockton to obviously assist in the tutoring of probationary constables. Having left the tutor unit, I returned back to Hartlepool and then requested to go to Middlesbrough because it was just closer for travelling, basically. So I left Hartlepool, went to Middlesbrough response on a shift there. And whilst I was there in Middlesbrough, that's when I applied to become a part of the ARV. I was already a firearms officer, an authorised firearms officer, and public order trained. So I'd done that for many years prior to becoming, obviously joining the ARV. I did that for about a year. It wasn't what I wanted to do, and then quickly returned back to response policing in Middlesbrough, and that's where I remained basically until being medically retired. So whilst I was in Middlesbrough, though, like I said, being acting or temporary sergeant, I was shifted between stations. So it'd either be go to Redcar and manage the staffing over there and work over there for several weeks, months, and then back into Middlesbrough, where I'd work up until the point, like I say, where I sustained my injuries and was medically retired. Yeah, so the injuries I sustained, it was I can remember it vividly, and I think it's something that will never ever go away. It was the 26th of November 2023. It was a Saturday night, from what I remember, and going into Sunday morning. As a response shift, I was one of the temporary sergeants there. We had an acting sergeant and the substantive sergeant who was on duty had to go to Rector as the acting inspector. So my inspector, again, at the time, she was pregnant, so she couldn't go out for health and safety reasons. So that meant, ultimately, as the only sergeant available to go out on duty, that means I was always going to be single crewed that evening. And so, to be fair, some of the constables were even single crewed that evening. So, like I said, the shift started, I think it was around about 9 p.m. Went out and about on patrol, ended up going over to Stockton, found a harness missing person. And whilst I'm over there, job coming at Hemlington, whereby a car had been reversed up a CCTV camera and set alight. I think 4 males wearing ski masks had exited the vehicle and ran off. So having located that missing person, I went over to Hemlington on the Casshouse Road, needs where the CCTV camera was. And sure enough, there's the car, literally reversed up, nose down on the camera. So obviously they'd done it at speed. Sure enough, it had been burnt out. And there was a couple of my units up there. So just for public reassurance and stuff like that, I sent the two vans, which were double crewed at the time, to remain up there on patrol and obviously just cover the area, make sure nothing else happened. So in between that, I think I'd gone to several different jobs, supervised scenes and stuff like that. And it was just probably a bit before, around about 2 o'clock, 2:30, I think it was. One of the officers had gone to a domestic incident, or domestic related incident. So I'd tended to back him up. And he was single crewed at the time. So when we got there, we dealt with the job. And I said to him, right, take your car back to the office. I'll follow you down. You can jump in with me if you're single crewed, and you can come out with me. We'll go on patrol up in Hamilton. So we did that. We went back to the office. He left his car there. He jumped in with me, and we drove up to Hamilton. As we were driving down Casthouse Road, this is probably around roughly about 3 o'clock in the morning. I pulled adjacent on Casthouse Road to where the CCTV camera was, and the car that's still up reversed up there, because obviously it was too hot to get recovered. So we had to leave it till the heat dissipated, and make sure everything, the electrics were secure in the CCTV camera before we even tried to remove the vehicle. So whilst we're there, look across, I said to the officer, look, that's what they left, the idiots, sort of thing. And next minute he says, oh, they've set another fire. And then he jumped out of the car and he sets off running across the grassed area, across another road into, I can't remember the name of the close now, but he sort of like disappeared from sight. So I ended up driving the police car over the grassed area onto the road, and then I had to get out of the car to go up this footpath where this fire was. It was round near some garages. So as I'm walking up there thinking, it's just a rubbish fire, because I could see, that's all it was. Some leaves and stuff like that had been set alight. And it was, don't get me wrong, it was a fairly big fire. I could hear a bit of commotion, but I couldn't see the officer. So as I get to the location, like I said, I couldn't see him. He's disappeared. And so I walk around the corner. I see him confronted by 6 males who were, being verbally abusive to him, stuff like that. And this officer at the time was only in his probation, young in service, like I said, probably about 19, 20-year-old. So I go over, the males, are still abusive and, towards us and stuff like that. So the main ringleader, who was told in no uncertain terms, behave yourself, either go home or you spend the rest of the night in the cell. And it's the usual thing where you turn your back and you walk away and you get told to fuck off, you fucking nonsense and all this. So we went back and I was like, look, I've warned you. And he said, it wasn't me. I said, it was, because I've just spoken to you and I recognise the voice. I said, you do it again. As I turn my back, I said, I will lock you up and you'll spend the rest of the night in the cell for being drunk and disorderly. Because to say they weren't even kids either. These people were blokes, in the late 20s, early 30s. At 3 o'clock in the morning, they've got cans of Fosters under their arms, drinking. They're absolutely bladdered, like I say, intoxicated through drink. So again, you turn around to walk away, you get some verbal abuse. So go back, and we ended up trying to lock this lad up. He was quite a big lad, quite tall, quite heavy set. So like I said, the 6 of them, there's only me and Joe there. So we get it. Try to get hold of him, try to get a cuff on him, and he's struggling, he's fighting. So we managed to get one cuff, I think, on his right wrist, and we just couldn't push him. We ended up pushing him against the car to try and get him handcuffed. And again, we were struggling. So I ended up getting my gas out. And I was like, if you don't stop resisting, you're going to get sprayed. So again, he's still fighting. And at this point, he's then shouting to the rest of them, there's more of you than them. Get them off me, fucking do them in. And like I say, these are words that, I'll resonate, stay there for the rest of my life. Of course, that got them angry. One started walking past the back of this car. So I got my baton out. I racked that. And then I ended up having to sort of like leave the officer to struggle with this male and fight with him, because at that point, one of them had come round the back of the car. So I ended up battering him to get him back, get him away. And the one I'd seen walk past initially sort of like disappeared. So I'm like, checking my surroundings. So went back to assist the officer, and then, the next minute, a load of bricks and bottles started raining down. So I ended up at the back of this vehicle. I ended up having to leave the officer, struggling, fighting to get this lad handcuffed. He managed to do that himself. I could see, the officer still trying to restrain this male who was desperate to get away. Whilst obviously the bricks and bottles are raining down on me. And it was at that point, like say when I think it was a beer bottle, I saw it sort of like come down, it hit my left hand. And as it hit there, obviously it must have exploded in my chin. I didn't realise that. But I could see the cut on my hand. And anyway, one of them ran up with a house brick and tried to brick me in the head. But thankfully, I managed to step to the right, and it missed. But it was one of them situations whereby they were that intent on causing serious harm and violence. I think if he had bricked me in the head and I'd have gone down, well, it would have been fatal potentially. We might not be having this conversation now. So at that point, I sort of like run forward with the baton towards him to try and disperse him. Like I say, I'd already asked for some assistance prior to that when we were struggling with the male. So again, I get back on the radio. I say, look, I need some assistance. And then at that point, I think that, like I said, there was more bricks and bottles come. I'd been struck on the leg with house bricks and stuff like that. And then I ended up pressing the emergency button saying, look, I've been quite seriously hurt. We need some assistance now. At that point, there could hear a siren coming, but I ended up, because I'd gone forward to the front of the car, the officer's still struggling with this male. 3 people had come out of a house, and then, I didn't see the assault on the officer, but the officer had been assaulted by, some of these other people, or the male that he was trying to restrain. There was people going in his pockets, so he obviously had stuff on him that they were trying to get rid of. So he's bouncing about, trying desperately to get away. I ended up battering this woman, and I remember trying to push her back, and she had a white blouse on. And the amount of blood loss, her blouse, I just remember the side of it being completely red. So at that point, like I say, when they could hear the siren, the other males had started to disperse, but then 2 of them ran up and destroyed the police vehicle, bricked that, and it's like, do you start running after them? Where do you go? And it's like, the first officer, as he arrived on the scene, I was like, right, you need to get over there and help him. They all want locking up for obstruction at the very least, assisting an offender. And then, it was only then that one of the officers, he come over to me from the shift, and he's like, you need to come with me. No, we need to go and get him. We need to get them all locked up. And he's like, no, you need to come with me. And he's quite adamant. And I didn't realise why he was so adamant and what had happened. I since found out. He thought, because of when the bottle had gone into my chin, he thought I'd had my throat cut. So he'd obviously put over the air that I'd had my throat cut. And he was probably panicking himself. And I get taken away to where my police vehicle is, that's smashed up. Medicard attends the scene, and I remember one of the officers from Stockton Street arrived. She next minute they cut my jacket off me, then the stab vest gets ripped off me, and they're checking for like stab to make sure I hadn't been stabbed or anything like that. All the time they're probably thinking I've had my throat cut, because I didn't realise there must have been quite a bit of blood loss from the cut to my chin. So needless to say, I got patched up. I directed a few patrols that were attending to go and search specific areas, whereby I could hear on, because I still had my earpiece and I could still hear what was going on. I was like, I think a couple of ARVs had got 1 or 2 of them at a different location. And I said, you need to get over there, you need to go to that location and assist them. So I was like, say, still giving directions of what to do and stuff like that. But then I had this female officer, she's like rubbing my hand, and like you see she was constantly panicked. So I was taken at the ambulance, and it was at that point I was like, I think realisation had set in, and it was like, I can't do this anymore. Because I mean, it's like anything in policing, isn't it? Over the years, you sustain numerous amounts of injuries, in the line of duty, through assaults, just through normal accidents of running after people, maybe falling over and stuff like that. But it was at that point, I think, like I say, the realisation set in. I was probably so close to losing my life that I was like, I can remember welling up and thinking, I can't do this anymore. And the poor police officer, like I say, she's holding my hand, said, "You'll be all right, you'll be all right." And then, like I say, I got to the hospital, and the inspector came from Langbar, who was a substantive sergeant from Middlesbrough. She'd arrived on scene. So she'd come to the hospital with us, and she's like, "Do you want me to call your wife?" So but this is probably around about 4 o'clock now in the morning. So my wife ended up having to come to the hospital, whilst I got treated, and like I say, sit there, and I'm sat there and I'm looking at, obviously, my hand that's bandaged up, and I had bandages on my face covering my chin, and I could see all the brick dust down my trousers and blood on my boots and stuff like that. And I looked up, and I remember looking at this young female officer and seeing that she had blood all over her, and I was like, wow, this. It's one of them situations you think, I was lucky there. I was really lucky to survive this, because if I had gone down, and my honest belief is that they would have either kicked me to death or bricked me to death, or something along them lines, just in order to obviously get him away as well. And it's like I said to my wife, I said, I can't do this anymore. So from there, I had to go and see a surgeon. That was it. That day. Obviously, they bandaged my hand up. I was sent home with obviously an appointment the following day to go and see a surgeon in relation to my hand, because obviously where it had been cut, it had severed the nerve and muscle in the hand, the tendon. So I had to go and see the surgeon the following day, and then I went to surgery later on that afternoon, whereby obviously they repaired the hand. To repair the hand, they had to obviously open the wound a bit bigger. So I've now got like a zigzag scar on my hand. And with that, because obviously you've damaged nerve, muscle and stuff like that, I still can't close my hand properly. And I've got reduced grip as a result. Obviously, the chin where the bottle had gone in there, that had been glued. But again, I can't wet shave, because, at the end of the day, it's like, say, if you wet shave, you end up, the fact like we're a year and a half down the line, you end up taking the top off it and it ends up bleeding. So, like I say, I end up having have this stubble sort of thing. So it has a detrimental effect on like your whole well-being, because again, as a result of that, then that trauma. I mean, you imagine the traumas that police see on a daily basis. Violent assaults, murders, stabbings, suicides, sudden deaths. In various states of form, decomposition, stuff like that. And all that over time sort of like has a detrimental impact on you. But I think the catalyst was, realising that I could have lost my life that night. Started, obviously, PTSD, flashbacks, waking up on a night panicky, constantly thinking about this brick that was coming towards my head. And again, all these issues with PTSD and stuff like that, well, it doesn't only affect me as an individual, whereby I can't go out. I end up becoming a bit I'm going to say reclusive. The fact you don't want to go out anywhere, you find it difficult to engage with people. You feel upset for no particular reason. You start feeling suicidal. And thinking about taking your own life, because at the end of the day, you've got all these pains still ongoing, like in your hand and stuff like that. And again, like say, when you factor in other injuries you've sustained over the years, I've now got arthritis in my hips from an assault in 2018 when I was pushed down a couple of flights of stairs. I've had to have surgery on my elbow as a result of that. So, like say, when you factor all these other injuries in, and you've got the ongoing pain and suffering, and then you've got the added trauma of the hand and the PTSD, you do get to a point whereby you just think, I can't take anymore. And like I said, there's many a time I've been sat in the house, I've sat on the stairs, and I've ended up crying, and I think, and I don't know why, what's wrong with me? And then you start thinking, are you better off dead? What happens if I go and chop myself? If I was to commit suicide, would anybody care? And again, because you're not thinking rationally, because you're having to deal with all the flashbacks and all the issues about struggling to go out and having all the anxieties that go with it, and like I said, the constant daily pain. You don't think properly at the end of the day. Like I say, so as a knock-on effect, and it has taken its toll on me both physically and mentally. But again, not just me, it has a knock-on effect because that affects my wife. How does she feel about having to come out to the hospital at 3-4 o'clock in the morning to see a husband having been seriously assaulted? That has a knock-on effect to your children, even as adults and stuff like that. Again, they have concerns about. I mean, even like when the kids were younger and stuff like that. Having death threats, and having to make sure that your kids couldn't go out and play at school and stuff like that, and having to carry a baton around and a radio around when you're off duty and stuff. Again, it's a lot to take on board, but like I say, it does have a wider effect on what happens to you as an individual, how you cope and how you recover. Because I suppose, like anything in life, there's only so much a person can take, and at some point, there's going to be that breaking level. And I think for me that night, I think the realization was I could have been dead. And I think, over the years, the amount of injuries I've sustained, like say through RTCs, it's faded now, but I had like a big Harry Potter scar on my forehead where I hit on collision going to an emergency. Some woman, although I'd contravened the red lights, she thought, oh, my light's green, I'll just continue regardless, and ended up hitting me head on. And I was like, wow, at the end of the day, end up, like say, as a result of that, you damage your knees, your hips, your back and stuff like that. So long-term issues there. Being pushed down 2 flights of stairs, honestly, isn't fun. It's like being in a car crash. And again, with that, fractured heel, fractured elbow, in relation to the elbow, I end up having like tingling feelings in my arm, whereby I've now got like probably an 8-inch scar, I think it is, where they've had to transpose the nerve to stop that. And again, there's incidents like that, that people don't realise how much the police do and how much they have to cope with. And like I said, the traumatic effects of dealing with stuff like that, not only affects them but affects their families. And like you said, my wife, because she works in a school, and when she's obviously talked to some of her friends about it, they're like, "Oh, I didn't know the police had to do this, and I didn't know the police had to do that." Wow. People just don't have an understanding of how much, like say, the police have to deal with on a daily basis. You've got to think, entry level officers coming on the probation. Obviously, once at a point whereby they've been tutored and stuff like that, they're out there doing the same thing for even less pay than what somebody with 20 odd years in. So they're doing that and doing the same job, with carrying the same workloads, encountering the same dangers for less pay. And I think that is, ultimately it's ridiculous. You've got to think the amount of stresses and strains on a daily basis that the officers have to deal with. Workload, excessive. Some officers 15, 20 jobs are trying to manage, some of complex investigation that CID won't take on. Because again, what the public and people, I don't think the government probably understand it sometimes. At the end of the day, yes, the police have got all these departments, but all these departments will only take on certain investigations that they've agreed to through local protocol. So you end up sometimes as a response officer, like say 15, 20 jobs, and some of them are complex investigations, whether it be frauds. You've got serious Section 18 assaults that CID wouldn't take on that says not an 18, and you get people charged and stuff like that. So, like say, when you factor all that in, the stress is just the daily stress and strains for a young constable just joining. 29,000. Is it 29? I can't remember now.
29,000. Yeah, the same as a bin man.
Sorry.
Same as a bin man, coincidentally.
Exactly, and you look at the stresses and strains of a bin man, and I'm not trying to put their job work down or anything like that, but my bins are just being collected today. They walk around the street, they collect the bin, they take it to the bin wagon, and they load it in, and then off they go. And like say, you pale that into comparison with a young officer at paid the same money, who's then got this workload. Not only the workload, but you've got the responsibility that comes with that workload as well. It's a heavy responsibility, and as we know in policing, there's always somebody there, whether it's within the organisation, whether it's the public, is all too willing to complain that you've made a mistake, you haven't done the job right, and stuff like that. And then the next minute, the officers are suffering scrutiny of investigations as to why this job hasn't been done right, being referred to DSC. So take that aside, then take add in that all that danger that they've got to face as well, and like I said, the massive responsibilities that they have, because at the end of the day, and I saw this, it was a New York cop I was watching on YouTube yesterday, and he was saying a similar type thing. He said, but at the end of the day, when you join the police, you're not only you're trying to look after yourself and make sure you do the right thing for the right reasons, to help people, but then you having to watch your back because there's people wanting to make complaints, trying to get you out of a job. You're looking at if you unintentionally do some act whereby it becomes criminal, you're potentially facing criminal prosecution. Example, having to be interviewed for that crash for careless driving for me was an absolute joke. And I'm thinking, at the end of the day, I'm doing my job. I'm going to an emergency where somebody's been assaulted. Yes, I contravened the red light. However, the person driving the vehicle coming the other way, because it was dark and you could see the blue lights bouncing off every building going, sirens on, and yet they didn't stop. But I'm the one who then has to endure potentially looking at criminal charges of careless driving and stuff like that. You're thinking, wow, why am I being interviewed for stuff like this for just doing my job? So, like you said, when you factor all that in for £29,000 a year, wow, that is, like you say, in comparison to like a bin man, that is really low, and it doesn't do justice to the hard work that officers are doing on a daily basis. I think in some respects it's a bit of an insult. 110%, I would not have joined the police knowing what I know now. I just think, at the end of the day, it's a thankless task. Because it doesn't. When you become a police officer, you sort of like you go, as you probably know, you're governed by regulations 24 hours a day. So it doesn't matter where you go, what you do. You've always got people who have their issues with policing, who don't like to be. So you've always got that in the back of your mind. You look at, like you say, the workload. You look at the risks officers take on a daily basis. You think, wow, I wouldn't have joined, knowing what I know now. Knowing exactly what I know now, I would not join the police at all. My son, he's in the army. He joined, from leaving school. He's Royal Engineers, and he's on about leaving this year. And initially, he said, "Oh, I'm going to join the police." I was like, "No." And then, obviously, after what happened to me, I think that's put him off completely. Because like you say, you end up, I had issues with trying to get my pension and stuff like that. I had to email the chief constable, who then had to email the head of HR. who got in touch with the pensions provider. And, even now, it's everything is a hassle, and you don't give them what you deserve at the end of the day. You're not recompensed for that risk you've taken in your career, like say potentially life-threatening risks as well. Because even going back to, like say, being an AFO, look at the scrutiny that AFOs go under, especially down in London, whereby they end up going, getting charged with murder for doing the job. And you think, wow, like you say, it's something that needs to be looked at and seriously looked at by the government to think, well, at the end of the day, we're asking these people to do an extraordinary job that is beyond a lot of people's capabilities, because not everybody can be a police officer. We all think we can do certain jobs. At the end of the day, it's like anything, isn't it? Only certain people can do certain jobs. And, I'm not saying I was ever, great at stuff like that. People might say to the contrary, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think it's a certain person. You've got to be a special person to be a police officer. You've got to have drive, ambition, commitment, and you've got to want to do the right things for the right reasons. Knowing, in the back of your mind, there's that risk there as well. And like I say, I think overall, the risk far outweighs, for what you get rewarded in monetary value. And like I say, even when you do get injured and stuff like that, it then becomes a bit of a fight. And you think, well, that should never be the case.